Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin Mish.
Good morning. This is the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Pat George back there on the board, popping the mics on a little early like I'm not going to notice.
The very feisty and energetic Pat George this morning.
He loves to try to catch us saying stuff off air like we're going to say something bad.
And now that I had my Cuban sandwich for breakfast, I'm in a good mood.
Breakfast, lunch, brunch, early brunch.
Yeah. You ever just want to say it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood? Look out that window.
No, that's so Mr. Rogers. No.
There is not a cloud in the sky. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I feel like you need to put up my sweater and tie my shoe.
A cold front coming this Friday.
I know.
They have snow where you live.
I know Pasco County is basically Georgia. It might snow, you never know. There's some elevation.
If you live in South Tampa, Pasco,
they did
Georgia.
say that it was going to drop in the 50s. In some parts of Florida, it's going to be in the 40s, possibly.
That's one of the things that's always sort of disappointing. It's sweaty, humid, nasty, and then it goes to 50? Like, that's just not right.
No, the weather has been cool for the last week or so. It's been awesome.
That's when
it feels like
over.
Actually, the weather the last week or so reminds me of California because the humidity's been really low. It's been nice.
I'm looking at Katrina with a cocked eyebrow. I don't know where in California you lived or were where that
I
was.
never lived anywhere.
The humidity was over about 30% ever.
Yeah, I found out this week. Yeah, you lived in California.
Yes, I did. I was born and raised in Southern California. Interesting little tidbit. I am a sixth generation Californian. My family goes back to California from the time it was actually Mexico. So before the gold rush, I can trace my ancestry.
Now he lives in Florida, y'all.
I live here in Florida on purpose because I love Florida. And I just
like it
love
better than
everything
California?
about it. I do absolutely love Florida more than California.
It's changed too a lot since you were a kid.
For sure. And to live on the property that I live on now would be in the several millions of dollars in California if you could find it.
Would you have more monkey business with the IRS, people doing that in California than you would here?
I wonder how your business would be in California. That would be interesting.
My business in California would be rocking and rolling because there's a lot of people in California. There's it's just the population density is really intense.
Not that you don't help people in California because you do.
I do, in fact, represent lots of people in California, and I can relate to them because I'm from there and I know the areas and whatnot.
You know what, though? Like, I have so many friends that live there, and it's this running joke with the people that don't live in California that when you meet somebody and they're from California or you talk to them, they just have that whole, I don't even know how to describe it other than, I have this client that moved here from Vegas, and I found out later he was born in California, and he works here at a local place. And he's like, yeah, my heart's really in California. I'm going, yeah, I could see that. Like, you have that whole California weirdness vibe thing. I don't get that with you, is what I'm saying.
That's probably because I left voluntarily, because I didn't
fit in that vibe?
Yeah. Although, there's things about California that are really wonderful. I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and if you don't know UCSB, it's a campus that has two sides of it are on the ocean. I mean, it's just spectacular, and the weather was just absolutely phenomenal, and the vibe was really super ultra laid-back surfer dude kind of thing, and I really did like living there a lot.
But if you ever try to have a conversation with someone that's from California, it just doesn't go well.
Well, you do every week, right about 9 a.m. on Thursday mornings on 1010 Money Talk.
Yeah, but it's not the same vibe.
You notice that his beard's getting longer now that he's living on the farm?
I know. I'm waiting for him to come in with it braided one day.
One never knows.
I'm going to post a picture of it, and I will tag Darrin Mish in that, so you can hop on over to Facebook and
now they just need to follow him on his Facebook because he's got all kind of Farmer in the Dell stuff going on always.
I try to be interesting on Facebook, and
I'm going to share it and tag you, and go ahead and keep talking there, Darrin, and then you can tag yourself and share it on the IRS Solution Attorney page.
A little farm update. So last week, the big announcement was we had one baby chick that was born, right? And so today, the announcement is that we have 8 successful hatches of baby chickens, and there's 20 in the incubator right now that should be hatching today, tomorrow, something like that.
You have.
Well, I actually have 2. And because whenever
isn't there a song that's like high tech redneck? I think that's
whenever I do anything, I do it in a big way. So of course I have 2 incubators, And Dutch will be next.
And he's collecting farm machinery every week. There's something new on the farm.
There's an amazing amount of work that has to be done on 30 acres.
See, my kids, I can't even get them to take the dogs out. We would never live on a farm. I'm just saying.
The kids are starting to grumble. They're like,
oh, just wait, it's better.
They're like, when are we going to the Ritz-Carlton again? Never.
See, you're older than me, but my kids are older than yours,
Right.
so you're not there yet. You know what I mean.
So my lovely wife, Heather, just sent me a text. She says, I can braid your beard. I'm like, okay, all right, that's great.
Heather, I still want to know. I ask Darrin every week when you're coming to hang out in the studio with us, and he's like, Heather's meeting in the office.
So I invited her, so she'll be coming on soon.
We'll have you on one day when you feel like coming, when you feel spunky.
So you think we ought to talk about IRS problems
I
or
think we
something
should.
related to taxes?
We
or something?
do have an agenda.
Do we?
Really do, yes.
Awesome.
I always wonder what I'm going to do if you don't show up one day. When you come in with the outlines, I'm like, I don't know what I would talk about.
More of what we just
I'll
talked
just
about.
ring the doorbell and you'll talk about
Talk about real estate stuff. Well, so today's topic of the show is what the IRS has on you. What did I read that wrong? What's the IRS have on you?
So yeah,
This is
what do they have
weird.
on you?
This
What do they-
reads weird.
What do they have on you? Like, what do they know about you? That's what the whole topic of the show is today. And,
So the
and
topic
how-
is Big Brother.
and how to find out what they know about you, preferably before they know enough about you to make your life miserable, right? So you can lay out a game plan, a strategy, and kind of figure out what you need to be doing.
How much do they actually know about me or you or somebody you represent?
Well, I think pretty clearly they know our names. Although in the case of females, I think typically sometimes change their names when they get married, right? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. One never knows anymore. But
I've seen some women men take her name,
yeah,
which is weird.
That's kind of why I made that comment. I've seen that as well. I'm not saying it's weird. It's just unusual.
I have an
right?
uncle that did that. I thought it was a little off.
Well, at least he's a liberated-minded individual, right?
Definitely.
So they know your social security number and they know your date of birth, I think.
And your bank information,
Maybe,
mostly.
maybe not.
I think they do.
So what we're really talking about here is you can get your IRS transcripts, and there's a variety of transcripts that are available from the IRS, and you can get those from the IRS so that you can see kind of where you're at, what the IRS knows about you, and what if you know, if you listen to the show a lot, or if you could visit my website and kind of study, you can figure out what it is you need to be doing, what your next step is from your IRS transcripts.
So are you saying that we can pull our own transcripts?
I can't believe I'm saying
Because
this.
I was asking you that like before the show, like what happens when I've got a couple customers that are trying to do short sales, but they haven't provided tax returns. And I'm like, Darrin, if they sign a 4506T, can I just get their returns because they're holding everything up?
So what Katrina's talking about is you can actually get a tax return transcript using a form 4506-T from the IRS. You can download that from the IRS website, and if you don't have one, or if you don't have a computer, you can give them a call, and we'll have that number for you later in the show. But the transcripts I'm talking about today aren't really, we'll talk about the tax return transcripts, but we're really not talking about tax return transcripts here. We're talking about account transcripts and some other types of transcripts. But in your case, you can call and get a transcript of the tax return by phone or online or through a tax rep like myself as well. Did you know that? And
No.
Would a transcript of the tax return suffice for underwriting? Do you know that?
Well, I know we're such a high fraud state anymore that it wasn't like only in Miami area-ish was it required. Everybody signed the 4506T in case of a random audit, but they would actually pull the tax transcripts and make sure that the returns they supplied them was the same as what they filed with the IRS. Well, now it's everywhere in the state of Florida. But I don't write loans anymore, since they've been doing that, so I don't know.
Real quick question. It's not the same all throughout the country. It's only Florida, or in some other states?
High fraud areas, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Florida is now considered a high fraud state, so they do it everywhere.
So we get singled out for, special treatment, extra hassle.
I've seen it actually hold up closings because they don't have the transcripts back. Everything else is done, but they do not have the tax transcripts back, so they're like, no, we can't do it. And then sometimes, it's so ridiculous, I don't know if you've seen this, but where they may file a return and they're like, oh wait, I forgot something, or I have to, they didn't actually file it, but maybe you got a copy of that one, but the one that was actually filed had a last minute correction or something. God forbid you accidentally give that one or have it hanging around and you give it to a lender. They're going to freak out like you tried to commit fraud. It's bad.
I can see that, having just gone through the underwriting process in the last few months. It's a lot different now than it used to be. It's almost like It's almost like the banks are part of the government now, where they're out there to make sure that you've paid your taxes. They make sure you're on an installment agreement. They make sure that there's, I don't know, it just seems...
Well, I can tell you this. If you ever watch the movie, The Big Short, it's on Netflix, and it's most people, I'm just telling you, it's going to probably bore you to tears, but being that I come from that background, I had to watch it. Like, my husband couldn't even sit through it. He was so bored. But
that's quite an endorsement.
It will. I'm just telling you, it's very intriguing. If you want to learn anything about the banking system and like what happened during the housing collapse, it will explain a lot, and it will probably answer that question that you have, Darrin. I know that it will answer the question.
When we come back after the break, we'll talk about exactly what kind of transcripts we're talking about here and how you can get them yourself.
Back in a minute.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish.
I promise he is, and I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for sticking with us.
Today we're talking about what does the IRS have on you? And what we're talking about is basically IRS account transcripts.
How do you get them? How much they know.
Yeah, exactly. How do you get them? What do they mean? And what do you do after you get them and that kind of thing?
I would love to know, like, exactly how much they know. Like, I wish we could have an IRS guest that would share. Like a disgruntled, fired IRS employee. They would make a great guest for your show, Darrin.
That's a good
they really
idea.
Would.
I could probably come up with that.
Them?
Some recently retired person, or not even so recently, probably within the last 5 years would be fun.
No, not retired. Like somebody that got fired.
Well, since that's pretty much like finding, a flying penguin, I don't think that's going to happen.
I know something about the IRS that they are searching right now for tax preparer volunteers for 2017.
What?
That's the public service announcement for today.
That's what they are looking for. They're asking you if you would like to be a volunteer to help, be a tax preparer for 2017. You can go check the IRS out, and they give you 5 reasons why you should do it.
Where did you get that information by?
The internet.
so it must be true.
That's a running joke in our house.
So, the Freedom of Information Act, you may have heard of it. It's a federal law, and it basically says that the government has to give up information in certain circumstances, okay? And because of the Freedom of Information Act, that's why you're allowed to get your IRS transcripts from the IRS. Now, you don't necessarily have to use a formal Freedom of Information Act request. That's called a FOIA, F-O-I-A, for Freedom of Information Act. You can use a FOIA request, and if you want to do a FOIA request, you want to ask for 3 different types of transcripts. This is the most complex we're going to get here in the show today, okay?
I know. I'm looking at all these acronyms and abbreviations going, oh, boy.
So if you wanted to do a FOIA for some reason, and I'll give you an example in just a minute.
And you saying FOIA, like F-O-Y-A? FOIA?
F-O-I-A.
Okay.
Okay? So if you wanted to do a FOIA request, you're going to want to ask for 3 different transcripts. One is the MIFTRA-X. That's MIFTRA-X. The next is the IMFOLT, I-M-F-O-L-T. And the last one is IRP. Okay? And you're going to want to go ahead and ask for each one of those 3 types of transcripts for whatever years are in question. So if you haven't filed in 10 years, like lots of my clients haven't, right? So you're going to want to go ahead and ask for those 3 transcripts for 2006 through 2015, and then the IRS will eventually send you what they have on you.
So this is something your customer could and should do before they even visit you?
No, they shouldn't. They don't necessarily have to do it. It's just something that you could do if you were a do-it-yourselfer or if you just wanted to know. A lot of times people are afraid that they're...
Is that kind of like kicking a business?
No, not necessarily at all. It's kind of like left hand, right hand. I've never seen it stir up any kind of collection action or anything like that.
See, I would think that would absolutely kick the hornet's nest.
Yeah, well,
but it makes sense you're saying.
I've never seen it happen. And a lot of times, if I do a FOIA request, and we don't do very many of these anymore, but if I do one, I also ask for basically the collection file. And what's cool about getting the collection file is you get the actual notes that the person that answers the phone when you call them, you get those actual notes, and you also get the revenue officer's entire file if a revenue officer is involved in the case.
Absolutely transcribed everything?
You'll get pretty much everything that's in there. Every once in a while there'll be something redacted, but it's most in a regular individual taxpayer file, there's nothing redacted. So
does it show anything cool, like what their intent is, or like what kind of information do you get from that?
Sometimes it telegraphs what their intentions were going to be. If taxpayer doesn't respond, next step will be seizure or levy, or they'll try and seize the assets or things like that. Occasionally you see that kind of thing.
Have you seen anything wild in those?
Not really. The The primary reason that we would do a FOIA request at this point in my career, because the online transcripts are so easy to get now, but the primary reason we would still do one is for the IMFOLT, the IMFOLT. And the reason is it has the IRS's opinion of what the collection statute expiration date is. So remember, the collection statute expiration date is the statute of limitations date. That's the date when the tax liability expires. And usually it's 10 years, and it's 10 years from the date the return is filed and the tax is assessed. So it's really not hard to figure out. But there are cases where it is hard to figure out because there's 3 prior bankruptcies, there's 2 offers in compromise, there's all these appeals, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And you can manually count it. But, and I've done that a lot, where literally I'm with a yellow pad and I'm calculating exactly how many days they were in bankruptcy and that kind of thing. But it's nice to see what the IRS's opinion is of the statute of limitations date.
Are those, in your opinion, when you see that, are those dates ever different, like than manually what you're calculating compared to what they're showing?
Unfortunately, they are different sometimes. So
who wins that argument?
Well, certainly if the date is shorter than I calculated, then I'm good. I'm not going to have a problem with that. I'm just going to go ahead and let it ride. But if the date is longer than what I calculated, then I'm going to argue with them and I'm going to get them to fix it. And sometimes I'm right, and most of the time I'm right actually, and so I can get them to change that. So it doesn't come up that often. Usually most people's statute of limitations dates are pretty easy to figure out.
So a little off topic, like if somebody like me wanted to, for example, order the tax returns because someone wants to do the short sale, but I explained to you before the show, their house is total havoc. Like there's no wonder that they can't find the returns because I don't even think they would be lucky to find their deodorant, like in the house. So with that particular scenario, if they sign a 4506T with me, can I just get a copy of their tax transcript?
Yeah, you can, absolutely, from the IRS. You can send it in. To get a copy of the tax return itself, you have to send a fee. I forget how much the fee is. It's around $25, I think. But to get a copy of the tax transcript, which is not a copy of the exact return, but it's basically a line-by-line representation of what's on the tax return. Sure, you can get that. You can get it online. You can get it by phone, or you can get it through the mail.
So is it a different form that you fill out to get an actual copy of the returns compared to the transcript?
Yeah, come to think of it, the 4506T is actually a copy of the tax return itself, and the 4506 is the tax return transcript. Now, the tax return transcript, this is sort of interesting. They're only available for the last 3 years, which is also, it's annoying and really kind of silly because all those other transcripts are available, like pretty much going back, as long as it takes.
Yeah, because there's exactly 3 lines. I remember looking at it.
But they only go back 3 years, which is really sort of interesting. There's no reason for them to be truncating that data, but they do it. There must be some internal policy reason to do that.
So I'm curious, like, how that works for you, because if someone's coming in, they have to file for, it's not 10 years, right? Is it 6 years?
It's usually 6 years, right?
So if they have to file for 6 years, but you can only go back 3 years, like, what does that mean for you when you're representing somebody that hasn't filed in 20 years?
Well, I actually don't use the tax return transcript or need copies of tax returns very often. Because if you think about it, I'm recreating the wheel. I'm like starting from scratch usually. So I usually don't get copies of the old tax returns. If the client has it, that's great. By the way, let me
say they're bringing it or haven't filed it.
Yeah, here's a helpful little hint for people who can't, like your example where they couldn't find their tax return if they tried.
They'd be lucky to find anything in there.
So what I would suggest is just get one of those free cloud sharing services like Box or Google Drive or one of those things, and just scan those things and put them up there. You'd be surprised how often you need copies of your tax returns. Like I have it organized like that for myself. And I feel like I'm giving somebody a copy of my tax return, like, I don't know, every quarter, at least once a quarter. And it makes it so easy. I don't have to go to the drawer. I actually have a drawer in my office where the paper copies are kept for years and years and years. But it's much easier to just go ahead and click a few buttons on the computer.
See, I have a drawer too, but I also have them in the cloud. But it almost makes me like not want to have them, but then where do you put them? Like, I don't want to stick them in my shoebox file and have them scan them in. So it's like, you almost don't even want the paper copies anymore. I don't.
Well, I don't know. Paper still has a place, but I think that's a good little helpful hint for people is go ahead and scam them.
Yeah, scam in those returns.
Go ahead and scan those and upload them to one of the free cloud sharing, storage options and just make sure
if
you
you think about it, like if you ever
those.
have a fire or something, it's really
exactly
good to have that. I mean,
exactly. Otherwise, you're going to be calling the IRS saying, "Hey, can I have a copy of that tax return from 5 years ago?" And they're going to be like, "No."
They would not call the IRS. I would call my CPA and ask them first.
Yeah, but there's a lot of self-prepared people out there. So that's what you would do if you do a FOIA request. And if you want to do a FOIA request, you go to my website at getirshelp.com, and there'll be a webpage there for the address for what's called a disclosure office. There's a disclosure office in the United States, so that's where you send your FOIA request. One of the great things about doing a FOIA request is if you have a serious fear that you might be under criminal investigation, usually that info transcript will tell you, or there'll be some clues that you're under IRS, criminal investigation. And so that might be a good reason to do a FOIA request.
How would that show on there? Do you know?
I don't really know, but there's indicators on there that it's under active investigation. Also, if you ask for those files, the collection file and the appeals file and that kind of thing, if there's a lot of stuff redacted, there might be a problem. So,
how would somebody know if they're under criminal investigation? Just a curious question for those of us that have never thought about that.
You'd examine those transcripts, look for things that are unusual, and then usually you don't know. What happens is the two guys with gold badges and guns show up, and you're gone.
Why is she asking all these questions?
I don't know. My mind is a little rogue this morning.
I think she might have a friend.
Yes.
No, I don't.
I think a very close friend.
Yeah, exactly.
I would ask them to come into the show. I would.
I think somebody that lives in her house.
What? What are you talking about?
I don't think she's understanding what we're saying.
No, I think I missed her.
We're saying you probably are fearful that you're under IRS criminal investigation.
No, but that's what you said. If you think you're under IRS investigations, you might want to pull the FOIA. And I'm like, well, why would anybody even think that?
Did you see her eyes get real big when you said that?
The reason that people think that because they haven't filed a tax return in 10 years or whatever. And there's people that have convinced themselves that every knock they hear in the middle of the night is the IRS coming to arrest them.
So we're just talking about Darrin's paranoid clients again. I got it.
Oh, that's just too harsh and too strong.
I'm teasing. We love you guys. We'll be back in just a minute. Stick around. We'll carry on with what the IRS has on you. Back in a minute.
Well, welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I'm your host, the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. We are actually streaming live on my Facebook stream because we had a little bit of a pattern interrupt in the middle of the show here.
During the break, we had something that I had never really thought of, but there was basically a fire alarm that was going off here during the break, and I never once for a second was going to leave the show. I mean, we're live. We've got to be here because we have good information that we're providing to people who need it.
See that red hot button up there? That means the mics are hot and we're live. Yeah,
it's not bad
behind the scenes studio stuff.
When you have everybody here, like engineers during the day, but when it goes off at night,
mm-hmm.
And there's only, the little people that don't know what to do. That happened to me, and I'm just in here doing the traffic, and a fireman walked by the door.
Wait, was this recently, Pat?
A few months ago, and they said, there's an alarm somewhere, but they were trying to find it. They found it that someone had, they couldn't get in the electrical room and stuff. So, but it was like, what do you do? I mean, someone's got to hold down the ship. So I just stayed and did the traffic and did everything else and said hello to the fireman.
I would assume that the powers that be would like there to be something going out on the air, whether there's a fire alarm or not.
Right. We don't go down until the water's to our knees.
Kind of like the post office, right?
Right. We stay right here. Keep playing the piano.
Unlike the IRS building next door, that the fire alarm goes off, they're all out.
They'd be closed for the rest of the day. Their computers go down remarkably often. Seriously, you call and you need certain kind of information from them, and they're like, sorry, call back, never. Our computers are down.
Well, it's interesting because I told Darrin, I said, I'm going to Facebook Live this. Like, we're just sitting in the studio and the fire alarm's going off. Is this real? Is this a drill? And I see other people walking by Facebooking Live, too. Only in a radio studio would nobody not actually leave the building hanging out.
I don't smell any smoke. We're fine.
Park a little closer next time with your truck, Darrin.
Yeah, it's actually so high. You probably
so
get
if we
there
need to
from the
step
second
out
floor.
from the second story window, we're good.
At least we're in a studio that actually has a window. I mean, many radio stations, most of the studios don't have any windows. You can't tell what time it is, day or night. It looks like Vegas in there. You have no idea. And that would be a little bit different, I think. I don't see any black smoke, so I think we're fine.
It was a drill, Pat?
It was a drill.
Okay, good.
It was a fire drill.
Okay.
You remember that in grade school?
Why did they tell us that?
Oh, because then it wouldn't be spontaneous, and you would ignore it.
Like, people in a studio on a live show are not going to ignore it anyway.
But you see how nice they did it? They did it during the commercial break so that you didn't have to hear that alarm on the air.
You could hear it during your traffic report if y'all were listening to Pat a minute ago. I'm sure you could hear that. All right, so our topic of the show, back to the meat and the potatoes, not the fire drill, is what the IRS has on you. And we were talking about all these crazy acronyms for forms and things that they pull, right?
Right. So in the last segment, we talked about how to do a FOIA request and what transcripts to ask for if you were going to do a FOIA request. Let's talk about something a little bit more practical now. Let's talk about how a regular person can get their transcripts, online and by phone, because it's just a whole lot easier. So the IRS doesn't usually make like short URLs, so that's easy to find stuff on their website. But I actually Googled IRS online transcripts, and the page came right up.
Somebody that sells it? They sell?
No. I'm sure there are people that resell free government information, but no, the IRS actually has a webpage where you can go to their webpage, and if you are the taxpayer, you can get your transcripts online. So you can get your tax return transcripts like we talked about. You can get your account transcripts, which is what I'm usually talking about. That's theoretically, that's the MIFTRA X. The account transcripts is kind of like a credit card statement. It shows exactly how much you owe, what the interest and penalties are, everything that's transpired on the case since that tax return was filed or not filed, all those kinds of things. And that's where you can really learn a lot about what's going on in your case.
How much security is there, Darrin, so they can actually verify that that's you?
Great question. I don't know if you know this, but a few months back, there was just like a brute force attack on the IRS, and the hackers did get through and got a whole bunch of people's, tens of millions of people's private tax information. That's why it's so fascinating. The government wants to put all your health care records online. That'll be great. But little sarcasm there.
How does that clash with HIPAA? Not at all.
But yeah, so there was some brute attacks, and they think they came from overseas, just like all these hacker attacks seem to be coming from. But when you log onto the IRS website, you're going to need your adjusted gross income amount from last year or the last tax return that you filed. That's one of the ways that they verify that it's you.
But wait, didn't you say we can't find the return, and that's why we're asking for it?
Yeah, if you don't have the adjusted gross income, you're not getting anything.
Yeah, I can see this is going to go over real well.
Yeah, so if you go online and you can't get the transcripts, then you're going to need to either go you're going to need to request it by mail. And on that web page where you can request them online, there's an address where you can send a request by mail. I would guess
certified mail.
I would guess if you request them by mail, it's going to take a long time.
So do you just send a copy of your ID?
I don't know. I don't really.
And just say, yeah, my address is the same as what I filed on my return. Send them there.
Well, here's what it says. It says get transcript by mail. What do you need? You need your social security number, your date of birth, and a mailing address from your latest tax return. Now,
okay, I got all that.
But you have all that. But my guy who used to live in Indiana, who now lives in Florida, and he was younger 10 years ago, because we all were, right? And
so.
He moved, he's moved 17 times in the last 10 years. He might have trouble knowing where the last address that, from his last filed tax return. A lot of people wouldn't, but some people will.
Are you RV people that travel and don't really have a homestead?
Most of those folks will have a P.O. box in a non-tax state like
Can you use a P.O. box in your tax return?
Yeah, for sure. I do.
Oh, cool.
One of the reasons why
we don't think we ever talked about that.
One of the reasons, well, I do, because I get all of my mail out of P.O. box basically, because I have an office and I think that P.O. boxes are more secure. It's really hard to steal mail out of a locked box versus, your mailbox in front of your house. We don't ever talk about this as a society, but, that's really not very secure. Mm-mm. There's this box that's open to the public and all your stuff is in there, including checks.
That's why, by the way, you can opt out of all those credit card offers so that they're not sitting in your mailbox all day while you're at work, and then someone just fills that sucker out and goes to the mall.
And where he lives now, the Pony Express only makes it there once a month.
Yeah, the police out there, their sheriff goes, sheriff.
There is a mailbox. There is a mailbox out on the road.
And Barney.
And
it's not a rural route?
The irony is, I don't check that mailbox very often because I don't get very much mail there. And if I do get a statement, from a credit card or something there, then I just change the address back to the P.O. box.
What's your address? Rural Route 49 in BFE, Florida.
I take all kinds of abuse.
Come on, we have to have fun. We got to break it up a little bit. All right. So if you order the tax transcript, how long does it take to get it? And how long does it take if you don't have that adjusted income? You said a long time, but is that a 6 month long time?
If you go online, it's essentially instantaneous, right?
Really?
I mean, if you go online, it's going to show, it's basically going to populate and you can print them out right then and there. If you do it by mail, the website says it's going to take 5 to 10 calendar days to get them to you. That's interesting. We'll see if that's true or not. It seems pretty short and pretty efficient, but, sometimes things work out.
I think maybe we should do a study, and then we'll report our findings on air every week. What do you think? Does this sound like a good plan, Darrin?
Well, routinely I see correspondence from the IRS that says, in fact, I just saw one yesterday. So now we're in October of 2016 for people listening to the recording. And I got a letter that says, for a taxpayer that said, thank you for your letter dated December 1st, 2015. This is in response to that letter. Okay, it only took you guys 11 months to write back.
Pretty
That's
prompt.
pretty efficient. Lastly, so you can get your transcripts online or by mail. And lastly, you can call them on the phone and you can request that they send them to you as well. And that phone number is 1-800-908-9946. 1-800-908-9946. Now, that is not my office number, but that's the IRS number to call and get your IRS transcript.
Darrin is at 888-GET-MISH.
Yeah, that's my phone number is 888-GET-MISH. We get calls for the IRS just about every single day, but the IRS phone number for getting your transcripts is 1-800-908-9946.
That's pretty cool, though, that you're getting calls, people thinking you're the IRS.
It's
That's how
because
you know you're doing what you're doing.
It's because the Google monster, when you type in IRS,
Darrin pops up.
I pop up, and people who are not like, if they're under stress or whatnot, they're not really thinking, they just call us, and then we have to tell them, no, sorry, we're not the IRS.
And we do answer questions, by the way, so if you have any and you want to tweet them to Darrin at Darrin with an I _Mish, also with an I, we will answer them live on air and also Facebook.
That's exactly. And also visit or join or I guess you like your page on, like the page on Facebook at the IRS Solution Attorney.
So we had a question from Joe, very relevant question, very right on time for our listeners and a lot of people that listen to the show. He wants to know, how much will he be penalized if he does not pay his taxes quarterly?
I was trying to find the penalty rate for failure to make estimated tax payments timely or before the show, and I couldn't find the rate, but I know it's really small. So if you owe, if you owe $10,000. Your penalty rate for that, or your total penalty for failure to make estimated tax payments, is going to be like under $300. So it's not significant. It's not serious, and that's actually probably one of the reasons why more people don't make estimated tax payments. Now, I'm not an advocate of IRS penalties, but if you penalize something, you're going to get less of that behavior, right? I mean, it sort of makes sense, right? If the penalty for late filing a tax return was $5 million. Either one of two things would happen. Either no one would ever file just in protest, or everybody would file because that's just so much money, right? The penalty rate on that failure to make the estimated tax payments is so low, it's so nominal that I don't think it gets anybody's attention. So it's not significant. That's kind of the bottom line there.
Okay, makes sense. All right, Stacey has a question too. Let's get to her before we have to take a break. Where is the best place to get tax forms if you don't own a computer? Can we still get them at the post office or a library? That's a great question. I don't even know the answer to that, Darrin. Do you?
You can get a copy of tax forms at 1-800-TAX-FORMS, believe it or not. It's the IRS. Used to be, back in the day, you could go to your library and you could get your tax forms. You could go to the post office. There was a variety of government offices. You could actually go to the IRS and get tax return or tax forms. Believe it or not, I was just at the Tampa office of the IRS, and all of the tax forms that used to be on one wall are all gone now. So the only way to get them is to either print them out online or to call 1-800-TAX-FORMS and get them there.
You walk in there and ask for them, would they give them to you?
They don't have them. They don't have them.
They don't want to waste all that paper anymore.
That's probably what it is.
Saving money.
There's probably...
People probably don't do that much anymore. They probably don't. Stacey, the question, nobody really asks that anymore. Do you go pick up forms from the post office or library? Because that used to be a normal thing, but in the day and age of computers and everything being online, it's kind of gone by the wayside. Yeah,
within the last couple of years, I did have to call 1-800-TAX-FORMS and request some kind of form, but I can't even remember what it was. But think about that. I deal with this every day in, day out, and there was one form in the last couple of years I couldn't get online for some reason. I think it was like a W-3 or something that was had colored paper.
Yeah, I think they still have them in Office Depot and stuff like that too, like the office
like
stores.
W-2s and 1099s and stuff. You definitely can buy them.
All right. So when we come back, we'll talk about anything we might have left out on our little outline here and what the IRS might have on you as far as information. I think we should share one of our headline stories. We don't get to those very often, Darrin, but one of them is the IRS finalizes taxpayer definition rules for same-sex marriages. I think we should chat about that. It's an interesting topic that people will want to know. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell, with Mr. Darrin Mish, and we'll be back in a minute.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH. I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for sticking with us for the break. And today's show, we talked a little bit about fire alarms, and we talked a little bit about what the IRS has on you. So it's kind of like a curious show, like how much information do they actually have on you, and how do you get some information from them if you don't have it?
Yeah, so let's circle back real quick to if you were going to do an online mail or phone request for transcripts, what do you ask for? Well, if you want a copy of the tax return, then you're going to ask for the tax return transcripts. And like we said, you can only go back 3 years on those. On the others, you can go back pretty far. I mean, I've gone back into the 80s on some cases. So don't do that unless there's a reason to do it, like you haven't filed a tax return in 20 or 30 years. And there's probably people who are listening saying, what? But there are people, I meet them, who haven't filed a tax return in 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Speaking of that, I want to clean out my office. And I was going through and I found all these old IRS records. And I know they say keep at least, 4 or 7 years?
I would say,
what would you do?
I would say 7 or 8 years is a pretty good rule. But
Burning down the house.
why don't you just scan those things and put them on Google Drive and be done with it?
Okay, you'd scan, the first 2 pages, or what would you scan? I mean, you have to scan the whole thing, because some of those, back when I used to make money, I have some thick records. Do I need
Really, 8 years, Darrin? You only have to go back 6 if you don't file. 8 years? Seriously?
Hey, he's the expert. Listen to him.
It's an opinion, He asked for an opinion. I can't tell you exactly.
It's a good question, because I haven't thrown any of ours away. We just throw them in the attic. Like the old ones, the new ones,
That's where mine were before I moved. For sure. They were all in the attic going back forever.
Fire if anything ever breaks out.
Yeah, and plus there's probably some rodent droppings.
And you know what? A little real estate tip. People forget a lot to get the stuff out of the attic. Like you're busy moving and packing everything else. We have to remind them, hey, by the way, don't
Let's
forget.
Get back to my question now.
Yes, whatever.
I'm only worried about me.
I was going to offer to help you, but never mind.
How much do I have to scan on that? I mean, it's in an envelope.
I would scan it all.
Oh, my goodness.
See, we have sheet fed scanners. I'm sure Katrina does too. You just drop 50 pages in there and you kind of walk away and it just goes zoom, 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 zoom.
Be nice to me.
If you really need help with that, Pat, you can give them to me. I'll
what if I
scan
lay
them
it
and
on
give them back to you.
a picnic table and just take pictures?
No, Pat.
There's a really good. That's not that. I know he's trying to be a smart aleck.
No, that's what.
But there's a
there's
great app called Scannable that you can get for your smartphone, and it will take a picture and turn it into a PDF.
Oh.
And then you can send it wherever you want.
Ask and ye shall receive. From this.
But on your flip phone, Pat, it's going to be a little blurry.
On his Nokia flip phone, circa 1993.
Got it right here in my hand.
So there were bricks back then in 93.
That's true.
All right, so real quick, our headline story, because we promised we're going to talk about it. The IRS finally finalized taxpayer definition rules for same-sex marriages. So what's the dealio with that story?
So one of the things that was sort of interesting as the whole same-sex marriage thing was coming up was that I was thinking, just from my perspective and what I do for a profession, I was like, man, you guys got to be careful what you ask for here, because along with marriage comes along a lot of other hassles, right? There's actually a marriage penalty. A lot of people don't know that, but married people actually file or pay a higher tax rate than unmarried people.
We do?
Yeah, you actually pay a higher tax rate than unmarried people, which is kind of crazy, unless the government wants to disincentivize marriage, which they say they don't. But anyway, that's a practical effect. But the other thing is that at first I couldn't figure out why all of my family law attorney friends were all pro same-sex marriage. I mean, like gung-ho. And then it occurred to me, they're going to get divorces. Think about it. I mean, right after same-sex marriage was legalized, I'm sure like a week later there was like the first divorces started rolling through.
Gosh.
So those were my thoughts when the whole same-sex marriage thing started to pass through. But for a while before that Supreme Court case had passed, the IRS was recognizing same-sex marriage in the states that were allowing it. I can't remember the states now, but there was a handful of states, not even half, I don't think, but there was, I don't know, I think there was 10 or 15 that were recognizing same-sex marriage. And so the IRS was coming out with the rules. So, there's just like this particular article is talking about terms like the term spouse instead of husband or wife.
Right.
Because you could have a husband or a wife and a wife, I guess. I'm not really clear exactly.
You should be gender neutral anyway.
I suppose. I guess there's no reason for there to be gender specific when it comes to tax, especially when you have,
a spouse is a spouse is a spouse.
Exactly. So those are the types of rules that the IRS passed to provide that for federal tax purposes, the terms spouse, husband, and wife mean the same thing.
So are we doing a train wreck, Darrin? Did you get it figured out?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
The train's always on time, too.
It's about that
The
time.
train almost didn't come this week.
It's the time for the IRS train wreck of the week. This is the segment of the show where we talk about somebody who came into the office and they're kind of a mess. And by the time they leave, it's all ends in a happy ending. So today's story is sort of interesting. This couple came in and they were kind of, they were in the later parts of their career. So they were approaching retirement age and they were living high on the hog. And they had racked up about $300,000 worth of tax debt. And at the time, we could not do an offer in compromise because they were earning too much money. And so what we did is we actually put them into a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And they owed about $300,000. And we wiped out like $250,000 of this $300,000, which is pretty good darn resolution, right? But we also knew that after the bankruptcy, very soon thereafter, they were going to have to stop working because they were retiring. And they weren't in great health. And so their income would go down dramatically. And so then what we did is we filed an offer in compromise on that last $50,000. And this is tentative. It hasn't gone through, but the IRS is saying they're going to approve an offer of $5,808 on that last $50,000. So, in a nutshell, looks like $300,000 is going to go down for about $5,808.
And that's a common misconception, too, because a lot of people think that if you owe the IRS money, it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy, and that's not always the case.
Exactly. And as I recall this case, this couple was making really good money. I want to say they were making $25,000 or $30,000 a month when we filed the bankruptcy, but they did actually owe a lot of money. And because it was all tax debt and there was very little consumer debt, very little credit card debt, they didn't have to follow the same rules that most debtors have to follow when they go into bankruptcy. So they did not have to go through the median income test and the means test. We just put them straight into a Chapter 7. The U.S. trustee, who is the overseer of all trustees of the United States, kind of had a mini stroke and really didn't like the case.
I bet.
But bottom line is, we used the law. The law says you can do it.
What type of tax that was that, out of curiosity?
It was income tax.
Okay, so income taxes didn't pay it. Wow.
You used the law. You pulled a Trump.
Oh, let's not go there, Pat. You'll get Darrin on a wild spiel, and we don't have time to finish that conversation.
We have a minute. Less than a minute.
Don't get him started on Trump talk with a minute left. We'll save that for Mason and Charlie in an hour.
Well, let me just chime in real quick. I do not recall a time in my life, period. I remember every election going back to 1976. I do not recall a time when we had two more disappointing choices than we have right now.
Well, it is what it is. I've been telling the kids for years now, you're picking the lesser of two evils.
Well, we've been saying that.
Yes.
But the evils have become so lesser.
Well, we had fun hanging out with you guys this week. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show for this week.
We're out. Thanks for listening.